Yesterday, protests erupted in Cuba, of all places. People were angry, chanting things like "down with dictatorship." They were flying the American flag. And this is shocking to many people, not just because America is dealing with some weird culture war woke crisis, but that people in Cuba don't typically protest. They kind of can't. It's a bit of a communist dictatorship. And this could spell the end for that regime in Cuba. Now, in Cuba, they're calling on the what do they call them? The revolutionary citizens to counter these protests. Yeah, the evil imperialists are trying to take over. Over in Miami, in Florida, thousands of Cubans in Florida have been protesting in solidarity with those in Cuba. And the mayor of Miami has been leading a call for U.S. intervention in Cuba. And wow. Yeah, I'm not all about that intervention stuff, but I don't like the idea of the U.S. going down, meddling in other countries' affairs and things like that. But I can say I am inspired and glad to see people rising up against communist dictatorship. It's really that simple. Now, of course, we get the media in the United States exemplifying what I said about that weird culture war and the American flag, because the New York Times is being dragged for claiming shouting freedom is an anti-government slogan. No, well, they said people were chanting freedom and other anti-government slogans. And it's like, shouldn't you have written they were shouting freedom as well as anti-government slogans? But I think it's funny that like a bunch of people on the right are like, freedom is not an anti-government slogan. And I'm like, I don't know, ask the libertarians that. I think it kind of is. But you get the point. Let's check out this story. This is really, really amazing stuff. No joke. Cuba's president is calling for revolutionary citizens to fight back. Miami is calling for U.S. intervention. Could this be the catalyst for the fourth turning? No, maybe not. I don't think Cuba is as consequential as it once was, like during the Cold War. But maybe the U.S. decides to intervene in Cuba, and then other countries say you can't do this, and then who knows? But I don't really see it all as likely. I do think that we're getting closer and closer to the point where the Cubans are going to say, we've had enough, we can't take it anymore, and that system might finally collapse. The Daily Mail reports thousands of Cubans took to the streets from Havana to Santiago on Sunday, chanting "down with the dictatorship" in the biggest anti-government demonstrations on the communist-run island in decades. The images of protests in Cuba that have gone viral on social media prompted officials in the U.S. to call for an American-led intervention to topple the ruling government in Havana. Okay, I'm not a fan of America going around and just toppling governments or whatever, because we're not the world police, nor are we the world's government. I will say, though, in this instance, I don't think it would be anything like Afghanistan or Iraq. I think the U.S. would walk in and walk out, to be completely honest. Though it's probably stupid to think that would ever happen. That's exactly what they were saying about Iraq. We'll be welcomed as liberators. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think if the U.S. got involved, maybe the U.S. is so powerful it can just walk into the Cuban island and just, plus we got Guantanamo Bay. But what's likely going to happen is going to be resistance guerrilla insurgency. So it's a really bad idea, in my opinion, for the U.S. to get involved in this stuff. I think providing moral support and encouraging the people to stand up for themselves is the best thing we can do. And, we'll see how it plays out. They say thousands of Cubans marched on Havana's Malecon Promenade and elsewhere on the island to protest food shortages and high prices amid the coronavirus crisis in one of the biggest anti-government demonstrations in memory. Now, here's one of the best parts. How was this being initially reported by mainstream media in the United States? Check this out from Yahoo. NBC Universal. Thousands in Cuba protest over COVID concerns. Government frustrations. That's right. Over on Twitter, there was a viral trend that said people in Cuba were protesting over COVID. No, I think it might be that they're hungry. I'll tell you this, man. The one thing that precipitates revolution is people being hungry. That's typically it. We saw that in the Arab Spring. There are concerns about the cost of food here in the U.S. and food shortages and what that might mean. And let me just tell you, America's a big country, 330 million people or so. A lot of people think there can't be civil conflict or revolution. You look at Cuba and it's not as many people, right? It's smaller. But I'll tell you this, there are food shortages coming. There are food shortages already. There are oil shortages, gas shortages. Now, all of these things can compound, and then eventually you just get very difficult to buy food and a lack of food. I'm not entirely sure how far away that is for Americans, because Americans are very, very well fed, just to put it mildly. But if the meat shortages persist, are people going to accept fake meats, lab-grown meats, etc.? That's what I think will be interesting. I think as long as people have something in their bellies, they don't revolt. Even if someone loves a good medium rare cheeseburger, bacon and ranch dressing, they'll probably be satisfied with food. I mean, look, people probably want that bacon double cheeseburger, medium rare or whatever, but they're probably going to be not so revolutionary so long as there is food in their bellies. So I don't care if it's lab-grown meat, soy meat, tofurkey, whatever. People probably won't revolt if that food exists, and I think that food will exist. So I'm not entirely sure what will happen in the U.S., but let's read on. They say many young people took part in the afternoon protest in the Capitol, which disrupted traffic until police moved in after several hours and broke up the march when a few protesters threw rocks. Special forces vehicles with machine guns mounted on the back were seen throughout the Capitol, and the police presence was heavy even long after most protesters had gone home by the 9 p.m. curfew in place due to the pandemic. Police initially trailed behind as protesters chanted freedom, enough, and unite. One motorcyclist pulled out a U.S. flag, but it was snatched from him by others. Cuba is going through its worst economic crisis since the fall of the Soviet Union, along with a resurgence of coronavirus cases as it suffers the consequences of U.S. sanctions imposed by the Trump administration. It comes after 6 decades of the Castro family dominating Cuban politics ended with the 89-year-old Raul Castro relinquishing the country's most powerful position, that of party first secretary, to Miguel Diaz-Canel, Cuba's president. In an address to the country, President Diaz-Canel blamed the U.S. for stoking anger and said, "We are prepared to do anything. We will be battling in the streets." Earlier, Miami Mayor Francis Suarez appeared at a demonstration in the Little Havana section of Miami, where hundreds gathered outside the famous Cuban Versailles restaurant to denounce the communist regime on the island. "Cubans are worthy and ready to rule themselves without tyranny," he said on Sunday. Hear, hear, man. I am proud to see these Cubans marching out and demanding freedom. Now hold on. What's that? People were throwing rocks. I'm not a fan of that. And I don't think the Cuban people need that. But far be it from me to tell the Cuban people what happens in their country. I'm not a fan of violence. I'm also not stupid enough to think that communists will just give up control freely. But it is possible. You just need that massive presence. Ultimately, I think this will result in conflict, as things mostly do, because the average person won't get involved. And that means there will be a minority of vocal, angry people fighting. They will fight the government because the government will have a bunch of people sitting down behind them, refusing to get involved, even though they hate the government. And therein lies the real challenges. There are a lot of people in this country who are fed up with police, but as we've seen in the United States, as we've seen with polling, most people want more cops. Most people aren't that angry with police. Some people are. I've got my criticisms. There are things that I'm not happy about with police. I think they violate the Fourth Amendment by claiming what's that I smell in your car? But most people are not that angry with police. But there is a small fringe minority. So when they got violent and started fighting with cops, most people were just like, we actually like that the cops are here and we want more of them. Granted, I think most people do think reform does make sense. With communist Cuba, it is a bit different in that you have a communist regime with no chance of representation. Think about what that means for the ongoing culture crisis in the United States. If Republicans are completely shut out from the political process, as the Democrats are trying to do and actually calling for, how long until they go out in the streets and it just gets brutal? Here's what I think. I think if the people of Cuba all peacefully didn't comply, that would be it. That would be the end of the regime. Unfortunately, for the realities of revolution is that most people typically don't. And then when people stop complying, there's usually a government reaction, which could be violent. But I'll tell you this. If the people of Cuba go out and mass protest peacefully, no rocks, then the police will have no leverage. We're in the information age. 4th and 5th generational warfare is very, very different from the way things used to be. When they could get away with whatever they want and then lie about it in the papers, it was easy for government forces to just gun people down and then say, we don't know what you're talking about. There's no witnesses. People would talk, but it didn't really matter all that much. Now we have photos and videos. If people are being peaceful, The government will not be able to just go in and start beating and arresting people because that will rile up more and more people. We saw this with Occupy Wall Street when Officer Anthony Bologna pepper sprayed 4 women for no reason. They weren't in the protest. They were friends with a lot of protesters. They were there for Occupy Wall Street, but they were standing on the sidewalk outside of the protest, yelling at the cops when he walks up and just sprays them all in the face. Maybe he could have got away with that 30 years ago. Well, the video went viral and it ignited people across the country. The government needs to be very, very careful. Now, I wonder why it is that when we had the BLM riots, of which that I very, very much opposed, nothing ignited. Well, I'm sorry. Physically, they ignited a lot of things. But where was the revolution? Now, a lot of people did go out and riot over Chauvin. That's what I'm talking about. The police did something. People got mad. But why did things actually die down? Why did it get worse? Well, support for Black Lives Matter collapsed because people saw the footage of the violence and the mayhem and the destruction, and they said, we don't want this. I can't speak for Cubans. I don't know Cuba. But I do know that at least in terms of what the government will try to do, as they're doing now, calling for revolutionary citizens to counter-protest, if you have thousands of people peacefully holding up their hands and marching through the streets, and the police come in and start cracking skulls, that will only ignite revolutionary citizens, not to counter the protesters, but to join them. And any smart government would know that. Fox News reports thousands of Cubans took to the street. This we know. President Miguel Diaz-Canel, who also heads the Communist Party, addressed the country and blamed the U.S. for stoking the anger, according to the Washington Post. The order to fight has been given into the street revolutionaries, he said in an address. Now, see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Why is it that we see the leftists, the communists, going down, burning down our buildings? It's because they just want power. They don't care about what the people want. They don't care about what the will of the people actually is. See, I actually care about democratic values. I'm not a big fan of direct democracy because I don't think it works. I like the idea of some kind of constitutional republic, though I think it needs reforms in some ways because you see what happens when wealthy elites dominate the republic. It doesn't work out all that well for the average person. But there's got to be some kind of service guarantee citizenship, some kind of, commitment to the community. For the communists, they go out, they beat people, they burn things down, and they steal, they lie, and they cheat. And they gain power by doing it. And it's working really, really well for Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Well, to a certain extent, as I mentioned, BLM's net approval rating is way down. And that's not necessarily because they have less supporters. They actually have, I think, just recently dropped below there's a 4-year low in support for Black Lives Matter. But it was actually at 52% in the United States, according to Civics. Now, the net support is dropping dramatically because not only is their support dropped a little bit, opposition is skyrocketing. When you go around beating people, eventually they say enough. Look at the response from the communist government, telling people to go and fight in the streets. That's exactly what I despise. So I don't care if you're a right-wing group or a left-wing group or whatever you want to call yourselves. I don't like the idea of people showing up with weapons and fighting in the streets. Nah. We need to be rational and calm people. Unfortunately, I don't think human beings are mostly rational and calm. And so long as there are stupid, violent extremists, you will get stupid, violent extremism. The order to fight has been given. Look at that. The government telling people, hey, sounds kind of like Kamala Harris. What did she do? She bailed out the extremists. Do you see what these people do? Do you want to live under that boot? I don't. I certainly don't. They say Cuba is going through its worst economic crisis. This we understand. And they reported 7,000 daily COVID-19 infections on Sunday with 47 deaths. Jake Sullivan, the White House National Security Advisor, took to Twitter to say, the U.S. supports freedom of expression and assembly across Cuba and would strongly condemn any violence or targeting of peaceful protesters who are exercising their universal rights. Now, how much do I care about what this guy has to say? Peaceful protesters. Oh, please. Your doublespeak finds no purchase here. We know what the Biden administration means by peaceful protests. We saw what happened in the U.S. when the extremists were going and destroying things. Now, isn't it funny? The anti-communist protesters in Cuba are getting support from the U.S. for being peaceful protesters. That's right. They only care about power. If you got communists marching through the street in the U.S., they'll say, oh, but they're peaceful. Why? It gives them power. Made Trump look bad, scared regular people, and they said, we're going to make it all better. This is Trump's America. Then you look at what's happening in Cuba, and they're like, oh, we condemn the violence from the communists. Bro, you are communists. But clearly, communism isn't what's relevant to the people in the Democratic Party. What's relevant to them and the general establishment, which includes Republicans, don't forget, power. They want power. They're elites. They think they're smarter than you. I'll put it this way. There are certainly people in government who are smart, savvy in the United States, able to find a way to gain enough power, either through populist manipulation or corporatist manipulation. Finding a way. I mean, it's always about manipulating the average person. These people are fairly smart, but smart only goes so far. I mean, look, are you good at manipulating people or are you good at economics? Probably the good economist who can actually fix the problem is not going to be as savvy when it comes to manipulating people to get votes. So we have problems. The reality is there are a lot of smart people. I think it's people say Donald Trump's a moron. And I'm like, Donald Trump's arrogant and emotional, but the dude knows he's high level. And that's a fact. The dude is smart. Is he smart in the way you think a smart person should act? No, but the dude certainly knows how to run a machine, and that's for sure. Also, he's like a rooster, you know. He's like bullying people, kicking doors down. That plays really well. The people who are smart enough to get in government are not necessarily the smart enough people. The people smart enough to actually run the system and make it work for everybody. So I don't know what the solution there is, but I can tell you the media ain't helping. Check this one out. The New York Times tweets shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans. Hundreds of Cubans took to the streets in cities around the country on Sunday to protest food and medicine shortages in a remarkable eruption of discontent not seen in nearly 30 years. Let's break this down. What do we know about the protests? They were yelling down with dictatorship. They were yelling freedom. I don't think they were just protesting food and medicine shortages. Isn't that funny? Now, maybe food and medicine caused a lot of this because they know they have lack of access to goods because of their failed government. But you see how the New York Times frames it? Shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans. My friends, now is not the time to sit back and ignore what's happening in this country. We can look to the Cubans and say they're willing to stand up to communist dictatorship. Where y'all at? The New York Times is telling us that saying freedom is anti-government. Now, I know all the libertarians and ANCAPs are out there laughing, saying it is. Government is not freedom. I agree with that. But you see what they're trying to say? They're trying to make it seem like if you oppose the government, like if you believe in freedom for the individual, that you outright oppose the government. You're some kind of insurrectionist or an extremist. Now, to be fair, libertarians don't believe in no government. They believe in minimal government. ANCAPs, though, I think believe in like no government. So, or like just like it's anarchy. There's no authority, right? Without authority. I think you can believe in freedom and still respect some level of government. I'm fairly libertarian, though my ideals are slightly left libertarian, but my realism is probably a little bit more right libertarianism. The New York Times, they are absolutely, in my opinion, on board with the idea of authoritarianism. I don't think it's necessarily about communism. I do think they're leftist in many ways, but authoritarianism is authoritarianism. It doesn't matter what the underlying ideology is behind the authoritarianism. Authoritarians just do what they want and they cause massive suffering. And that's what they're doing, what they plan to do. And that's why you get these articles from the New York Times where, well, they say hundreds of protesters. That's strange. We've seen videos that show thousands of people. And they were doing it in more than in various cities. Look at this. They mentioned took the streets in cities around the country. So are you saying that if multiple cities, let's say there's 5 cities, 20 protesters per city? That is not true. The New York Times is falsely framing this, trying to downplay what's happening in Cuba, making it seem like it's about just medicine shortages. Technically, that's the truth. When people can't get food or medicine, they get really, really angry. But the Cubans are denouncing dictatorship. They're upset with the communist regime. They've had enough. Why is it that so many people would risk their lives fleeing from Cuba to the United States? Why is it that in Miami, a safe Democrat district flipped Republican? Because these people know exactly what happens with communists and socialists. Why is it that on the southern border of Texas, we saw these Hispanic districts turn Republican? They were supposed to be safe blue. It's because many of the people who fled Venezuela and Cuba know exactly what's coming if you keep supporting the psychotic communist and socialist individuals who are putting pressure on the Democratic Party. They've seen those signs. They know what comes next. Me too, because I've been to Venezuela, and I've read a little bit about Cuba and China and Venezuela. Now, I don't have the experience these people do. These people had to physically flee from their home countries because of dictatorship. Can't speak, can barely work, can barely eat. They had to flee. It's a shame. It is. But when you don't have the support, perhaps the smartest thing you can do is leave. But what happens when all of a sudden there's a spark and all of the regular people said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore? All of a sudden, then you have that popular ground support to say no more. Here's what might happen. The Cuban police, apparently, what are they called? The Black Berets have been coming out beating and arresting people. This could ignite more anger and rage among Cubans who don't like the government but are too scared. Eventually, they realize no matter what, the authoritarians will come to your door and they will kick it in and they will take your stuff and they will beat you. And then what happens when someone's brother, sister, mother, wife, dad, grandfather, son, daughter gets beaten or arrested? And then they're forced into the fray, not because of any political issue, but because of familial issues. This is the downward spiral Cuba faces itself in. And you know what? Good. Cuba should not be communist. Communism is trash and doesn't work. It's about time they realized this. And it's about time these dictators who just strangle people for power are forced out. That's what's got to happen. They've got to be. Look, the U.S. has its problems, and a lot of people are disenfranchised right now over what we saw over the past 5 years with the media and the lies, and that's why we have to be vigilant as well. Otherwise, we'll get the same thing that they got. And it seems like we're walking into that place because too many people are scared. Well, don't end up like communist countries. Hopefully we don't, But you can take a look right here. Arrest Trump now is trending with 154,000 tweets. Why? There's a video. It's a mashup from January 6th, and it frames Trump in the most negative light possible, which takes things out of context. Doesn't matter whether you support Trump or don't. What matters is that in the U.S., the rhetoric continues to escalate. My friends, when I was talking 3 years ago about the potential for civil war, because scholars had been saying it, security experts had been saying it, and people poo-pooed me and scoffed. Not everybody. A lot of people said, well, we'll see. I got a lot of messages from people, conservatives saying, oh, it's never going to happen. These street fights won't devolve. Where have we gone since then? In, 2017 and 18, we have these street fights, different political groups fighting each other. It escalates to the point where we have these massive street battles. And I'm not going to say the name of some of these, but people died. One guy got gunned down in the streets of Portland. Yeah, it's escalated to that point. People seem to think that you need something to happen every single day for it to be a major conflict. But you look back at the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, and that's not how it was. Most days, nothing was happening. And then you had these periods of tumult. So we look at where we are now. And when I said, I had all these leftists laughing, saying, Tim's nuts. I had one guy say, hey, come on my show. Hey, Tim, remember when you were telling me Civil War? Yeah, what happened, man? I thought it was going to be crazy. And I was like, on January 6th, a bunch of Trump supporters stormed into the Capitol and shut down the electoral vote count. And then they're like, oh, yeah. Oh, about that. Don't be a frog boiling in a pot. What happened on January 6th, it was a riot, for sure, but it was an escalation. What the FBI is now doing, going after literally every single person, even the little granny who the cop opens the door for. You see the video. He opens the door for. She walks in. The cops are going after her. They raided the wrong woman's home in Alaska. All of it is escalation. Now they put out these videos showing Trump mishmashed out of context, showing violence, saying arrest Trump. We're in a lull period. This is a lull year. Views are down across the board on political content. Why? We just had a presidential election. A lot of people are tired, don't care. But the midterms are next year, which means the next few months, campaigning will begin. Then we get 2023, the primaries. Campaigning will once again begin. And then we get 2024. Already, Democrats are saying, this is it. This is the end. If Republicans take the House, it's all over. The rhetoric is getting worse. Perhaps, as I always say, it will end here. The FBI will say, look, we're satisfied with the arrests we've made. Everyone's calmed down. People say, okay, we'll give Biden a chance. There's an election and Trump says, I'm not going to run in 2024. And then everyone decides to just shake hands and say, bygones be bygones. Bygones, Do you think that's going to happen? I don't. I don't know what's going to happen. I guess we'll wait and see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.